When my family came to visit me last summer, they wanted to go on a whale watching trip. So we've been out on Puget Sound Express many times. Sometimes we've seen orcas, mostly minkies and gray whales. This time was different. We were hardly out of the marina when we spotted 2 orcas. Our naturalist identified them as brothers, and we followed these 2 beautiful boys straight north for almost 2 hours. It was awesome. They breached, they blew, they dove. Sometimes we thought they were gone, but it turned out they were just diving deep and then they'd pop up again. I think it's called spy hopping. They seemed to be having fun with each other, maybe with us. I just felt this incredible joy watching them. And at the same time, I felt this angst. Why? Well, you all know that our iconic orcas are just critically endangered. The biggest threats they face are lack of food, chemical pollution, and noise pollution, all caused by us. But there is hope, and that hope is embodied in the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. We teach people what those threats are. We show them how they can be mitigated, and then we inspire people so that they actually can take action and make a difference. We want to make sure that this beautiful place we call home, fog and all, which I love, by the way, stays beautiful for everybody that lives here, whether on land or in the water. We focus our conservation efforts on the Salish Sea, so our audience is mostly people in this area. That's beginning to change. Now, COVID was a slog, but one of the good things that came out of it is we became much more technically proficient and learned how to provide our services online. So we really expanded our geographic reach. And now, Flagship Landing, downtown, we're going to be able to inspire so many more people. Fort Worden is a destination visit. Downtown, we'll be able to engage with anybody and everybody that walks down Water Street. Might be we locals who are going shopping, cruise ship passengers, anybody who comes to visit by ferry, by car, by boat, that they want to see our great community. So we have exciting times ahead. The past few months, I've had the opportunity to introduce our new executive director and tell you a little bit about her background and why we chose her to lead the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. But new doesn't fit anymore. She just celebrated her 6-month anniversary at the Port Townsend Marine Science Center. Yay! And since she has been here, she has just hit the ground running, learning everything she can about what we do, meeting with all sorts of folks in the community, and planning our future. So I am so pleased to introduce our dynamic and passionate Executive Director, B. Redfield, who will tell you about some of those exciting plans.
Welcome to this beautiful morning in Port Townsend. I like to say beautiful pretty much every day that I'm here because it's much more beautiful here than where I came from in Indiana, where we just had our first hard frost. So I wanted to start out by just kind of sharing a little bit about what brought me here. I know that I've shared this with some of you who've come to our other events, but what Port Townsend Marine Science Center does for this community is really what motivated me to come out from academia. I was working at Purdue University, studying there and in the conservation realm. But here in the Marine Science Center, in the community, is where the actual, the hands-on opportunities to use this conservation knowledge that we're learning in the universities and around the world is actually making the impact. So being able to be someone who leads an organization like that, along with the help and support of all of you, is just such a tremendous honor to me. So thank you. We're going to go ahead and jump right into our Eleanor Stops Leadership Award. And this is something we've done for quite a few years. I was kind of selected to present this award this year. I had heard about Eleanor and Zella and the work that they did before I even came here, because I, by trade, am an ornithologist, so birds are one of my many passions, but probably my most passionate topic. Eleanor really is an example of how one person can inspire, just through their passion and their hard work, this domino effect, this grassroots effort, which a lot of what we do at Port Townsend Marine Science Center, through all of you, she's such a great example of that. And through her hard work, she was able to get Protection Island established as a wildlife refuge. And for those who know birds, it's incredibly important to our seabird. That habitat there is where 70% of the species of seabirds in this area nest. So without that protection, that would have been significantly less over time. So thanks to her, there's a place for seabirds here, hopefully forever on forward. And so to me, that story is kind of symbolic of the Marine Science Center, because we obviously got our start as well through two incredibly passionate women who just did what they love, and that passion communicated out to the community, and this is what was built. So Eleanor is just such a symbol of that. And as a younger person, she is a hero to me, as well as our Eleanor Stops Award winner this year. And this is an especially, I think, pertinent award to be giving to this person, because this is someone who actually in her early career worked with Eleanor in helping to get that wildlife refuge established. So a little spoiler there. So our award winner this year is Lorna Smith. She started out her career as a volunteer with Seattle Audubon in 1978. And during that time, she successfully organized against a dam on the Skagit River system at Copper Creek. She went on to become the conservation chair and the vice president in that role, and as I said, worked with Eleanor to secure the wildlife refuge. She then went on to help stop the construction of the Northern Tier pipeline from Port Angeles to the mainland. And her environmental and political career has spanned many decades. She has served as the executive director of the nonprofit Western Wildlife Outreach, as a board member of the Washington Environmental Council and the Olympic Forest Coalition, as a volunteer for Jefferson Land Trust and Jefferson County Conservation Futures Committee, and most recently she was appointed by Governor Inslee to the Washington Fish and Wildlife Commission in 2020 and is currently a member of the Jefferson County Planning Commission. So please help me to congratulate Lorna Smith.
So I'm truly honored today to be the recipient of the Eleanor Stops Conservation Leadership Award. As Bea said, I had the privilege to know Eleanor well and to work alongside this amazing lady. In my decades of life and work alongside my wildlife biologist husband, Daryl Smith, my vocation and avocation as an ecologist and nature lover have led me to many interesting places and experiences, from tracking wolves in Canada to rescuing toucans, sloths, paraquets, and even tarantulas in Costa Rica. Yet when I look out the window of our home on Discovery Bay and I see Protection Island front and center, I feel that ongoing sense of pride, wonder, and awe that securing its full protection happened at all. It almost didn't. And so today I'm going to focus on this campaign because it's appropriate, even though it happened a long time ago, to talk about it. In the fall of 1977, as an Audubon activist, I first saw Eleanor Stops' presentation on Protection Island and her work to save it from a 400-lot subdivision that had already been approved, many of the lots already sold. Protection Island, as Bea mentioned, provides 72% of the habitat that's used by seabirds that are nesting in Washington's inland marine waters. The development would have devastated that critical habitat, and her presentation had me hooked. Although I wasn't living on the peninsula at the time, I was very aware of my family roots deep in the region. My grandparents were lighthouse keepers on both Destruction Island, another important seabird nesting colony, and at Dungeness. My father attended school at the old Dungeness schoolhouse. He was a true naturalist and mariner, both traits I inherited from him. So I felt a deep attachment to the local marine waters and inhabitants, furry, feathered, and finned. And I had to step up and help Eleanor save that very special place. So following her presentation, I immediately stepped forward and offered my help. At the time, I was conservation chair for the 4,000-member Seattle Audubon chapter, and also on the board of the Washington Environmental Council. Eleanor and I strategized how to take the campaign that she had been waging to a much wider audience, including elected officials, and all the Audubon chapters and other conservation groups across the state. Eleanor and I immediately clicked, and we realized we were even more effective by combining our complementary strengths. We soon became a pair to be reckoned with. At that point, Admiralty Audubon's Adopt a Seabird program, created by Eleanor, had already raised enough funds to purchase a number of lots, but not 400. We needed wider support, and we needed funding. We reached out to our respective congressmen, Don Bonker for Eleanor and Mike Lowry for me, with the enthusiastic help of Mike's birdwatching congressional assistant, Lynn Korn. We put together a legislative battle plan. A bill was soon drafted to create a national wildlife refuge on Protection Island. But how to ensure we had the votes and broad support for the bill's passage? We plotted a plan based on developing a statewide and then countrywide letter writing campaign. Yes, people actually wrote physical letters back then. And I wrote a column every month for 2 years in Seattle Audubon's widely circulated newsletter, exhorting members to write in support of our bill, phone calls, writing. We did mailings and phone calls, racking up at that time huge long-distance bills. Eleanor, of course, did the same for the local Admiralty Audubon and continued her lecture circuit to garden clubs and community groups, handing out our Protection Island fact sheets and raising funds for the Adopt a Seabird campaign. Our efforts finally caught the attention of National Audubon and their DC office, and they stepped in to help with lining up additional congressional sponsors. Eleanor and I took 2 trips to DC ourselves to meet with as many key legislators as possible and to get their support. Many of them already heard from their own state's Audubon members, so our work was made easier. Eleanor and I both testified before Congress twice. All right, I will admit it, the tufted puffins helped steal the show in DC. But the enduring message from the campaign I want to convey to you, which is as meaningful today as it was those many decades ago, both in creating Protection Island National Wildlife Refuge and many other successful campaigns I've been part of, such as stopping Northern Tier Pipeline and oil port in Port Angeles, and the recent banning of Atlantic salmon net pens in the Salish Sea. No one person, thank you, yeah, can win these fights alone. It takes a village, it takes a community, it takes each one of us. It takes an army of people who care enough to stand up and be counted and to demand that their voices be heard. Many of you here today know that and have provided those voices at critical times. And I hope you will continue to speak up and speak out, because our planet needs us all now more than ever. Protection Island became a national wildlife refuge on October 15th, 1982, with full funding procured in 1983 under President Reagan. It remains one of the only U.S. Fish and Wildlife refuges created by direct congressional action, and as a result of the tidal wave of grassroots support started by Eleanor, taken up by me, and then many of you, to save that small island at the mouth of Discovery Bay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lorna. And we get to see Protection Island, and I will say every morning when I wake up and look out my window and see it, it just inspires me. It gives me the sense of purpose of what I do every day. So thank you for everything that you did to get that established, because it is going to continue to inspire people, I think, forevermore. So thank you. Our next speaker, when we were trying to choose a keynote speaker for today, Lisa and I were kind of brainstorming about where we were as an organization and what we wanted to reflect in the keynote. And obviously our big exciting news is the Flagship Building and our plans for the future. And after having met our keynote speaker, it was so clear to me that his knowledge and passion for architecture, and specifically for how to make architecture a tool that we can use to fight climate change, not only to, kind of mitigate our carbon footprint and reduce the spread of it, but to really fight back, which he's going to talk more about. He was the perfect person, and he's such an engaging, dynamic speaker, so knowledgeable. So we are so thankful that he agreed to do this keynote for us. This is Mark Johnson, who is with Signal Architecture. Many of you, I'm sure, may know him from the work that he's done at Fort Worden with the Makerspace, and he also did the due diligence study for us on our flagship building. So we've already worked with him in the past, and just wonderful experiences all around. So I hope that you enjoy this talk from Mark Johnson.
So just following up on Lorna's conversation, we'll talk a little bit about architecture, but I won't take you deep into the technical weeds of how a building's metrics will create tools for climate change. The idea of community, and it's much more than one person, and it's much more than one thing that is going to help us move to the future. Architecture is the result of design and engineering of a place that does something. That's different than a building. Like a building, it's a box, you store stuff there. I might not call that architecture, but something that does something. Think about downtown Port Townsend, think about a hotel, think about Marine Science Center, think about a school. They do something, and they have this ability to create delight or wonder or information. And we're at a moment where our spaces and our places really need to take on a role for climate change. So I want to start with a story. As a kid, my folks, I grew up on the East Coast and moved around a lot. My folks decided to sell the cars, the house, the stuff. They probably would have sold the kids if they could. Put the dog with the grandparents and moved on a boat. It was a 40-foot island trader, motor sailor, so we could putter in the Intracoastal Waterway. We could go offshore if we needed to. And we went down the coast from New Jersey, and we were in Florida. We're getting ready to go to the Bahamas, and we're waiting. And you're in a 40-foot sailboat. I don't know if anyone's made that crossing across Hawk Channel. You have to go when the wind's out of the south. You can't go when the wind's out of the north because you'll get pushed too far south, and then you wind up hauling your way back to Bimini, this little tiny island out there. It's not that far, but in a little boat, it's a world away. So we're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. We're waiting for a couple days, and the wind is still coming out of the north. And we're in this beautiful, green water. You can see the bottom. It's amazing. And I was 13 years old and incredibly bored, sitting there on anchor for 3 days. There's only so much gas in the dinghy that you can use during the day. So it's late at night, and I convinced my parents, it's okay, I can go swimming at night, right? It's okay. So I climb up to the spreaders, up maybe 20 feet above the deck, and jump into the water. And we'd done this all the time. I had no idea that it was going to be this explosion of blue light. Amazing. This, what we called phosphorescence, which is bioluminescence, and this dinoflagellate here really woke something up in me. I didn't know what it was. I can't say that that was what made me me, but I was different after that. And that's what we need to think about when we think about architecture. How can we make things that when people visit them or understand them, they're different after that? So now we'll go in the weeds. So looking at the global CO2 emissions by sector, looking at transportation, industry, you think that those are the things that smokestacks, they create a lot of emissions. Buildings are a huge amount of our carbon. They're a huge amount of our global energy use. So if we can target those, we can take on almost half of what's being produced, consumed, and generated in the world. So building materials and construction, where the things come from, that's 10% of the carbon. We can do better. Marine Science Center has done better by buying an existing building. So we can do something with that and really take at least 50% of that carbon that's created by a new building off the table, and then we can continue from there. And then building operations, looking at how we can create buildings that are potentially producing more than they use. So thinking about how we do more good. So looking at the Faro study, which was around 1983, looking at the word sustainability. Yves Chenard from Patagonia said, don't use the word sustainability until you can give back more than you take. So this is a project that around 2003, it's called Mercer Slough Environmental Education Center. Janine and I met around this project. About 10% of this building touches the ground. So think about that, 10,000 square feet, it's about 1,000 square feet if it touches the ground. It's quite a small footprint. The foxes, the deer, the critters, they can all walk under it. They don't know it's there. It uses more energy than it produces. It's sustainable. So it's something that, that is doing less bad, and we need to ask them to do more good. It was still a good one. It got high ratings with rating systems. But then when we look at something about that restores systems and thinking about restorative sustainability, it's something that creates or restores the ecological function. Think about this building, which is the Van Dusen Botanical Garden in Vancouver, BC. The bugs and the birds, they don't know it's there. They think it's habitat. So that's where we're starting to get somewhere, right? So this is around 2010, 2011, really great example, lovely building, lovely program. But then when we think about regenerative sustainability, doing more and giving something back and providing more than you need. So this is the UN 17 urban village in Copenhagen. We don't have one of these yet. This uses the UN 17 sustainability guidelines that when we think about sustainability, we think, okay, solar energy if we can afford it, geothermal if we can afford it, let's use less power, let's get our energy use index down, let's use less plug loads. This doesn't start there. This starts with health equity. Do people have access to education and food and community? Those are the first levels of sustainability. And then, do they have access to safety and information? Then we start to think about energy. Are we producing more energy than we need? Are we treating our water? Are we creating something that makes a community or the city thrive? So that then begins to think, it's our community. It takes a community to fulfill these goals. So some examples of the goals, we talked about food, reducing inequality, creating accessibility. When we think about accessibility, we think of ADA, we think of an elevator. Let's think about hearing impairment. Let's think about access for the blind. Let's think about access for all ages. The idea of rolling and strolling from cradle to walker, creating a place that's accessible for everyone. So when we think about this, these might be things that we think about for Marine Science Center. So the idea of thinking big. Don't let reality be a crutch. Challenging the building code. Building codes are there. They're like laws. You don't break laws, right? But we don't walk through life just not breaking laws. Let's do better. So take business as usual, turn it over, and make the impossible real. And looking at people in place, starting there, a lot of times we think about design where maybe we'll come up with a sketch and that's the first idea, right? Sure. But that's maybe my idea. That's not your idea there in the back. That's not your idea over there. So we could start with a concept. We could talk about the words around what we want to do. We'll talk about concepts in a moment. But the first thing really is a collective belief around we can do this, and it's something that we trust each other in order to create something that's really going to be profound and change the world. That harnesses the potential of the people who are involved. So we do a whole lot of listening before we do much directing, and that then empowers the community to really bring their voices to set inspiring goals, and then clarifying the vocation, creating a purpose for why we're doing this. So it's something that we can keep coming back to when there is a financial challenge, there is an economic challenge, there's a code challenge. How are we going to solve for that together? We know someone who has an answer, right? And then inspiring stewardship, so that we don't know whose good idea it was that started it. What happens when, 50 years from now, someone says, whose idea was this anyway? This was a really good idea. Well, it was all of us. So when we think about how we make action for a functional, physical, social building. We've talked about those things. It's got to function. It's got to have a job in order to be architecture. Physically, it has to use less energy and create more than it needs. It has to be social. And to be social, it has to have a story. So we're going to talk about a wastewater treatment plant. So it's the building that no one wants to be friends with. It's the one that no one wants in their neighborhood. The first thing you hear about is my property values. So we'll talk about how can a wastewater treatment plant become something that gives back. This is a project in North Vancouver. It's a very wide cross-section. The site proposed was on a brownfield, so it was a very dirty site. It was a Canadian rail site that had long been storage for bunker oil. It was right next to the sulfur plant, and it was also next to a neighborhood that was 75 years old. There was a bike trail that went right past it. So there was a lot of concern over this smelly new neighbor that was coming. So we started wide with belief, like what are the concerns? So creating the questions around what the concerns were, and all of you would probably come up with many of the same. It's gonna smell, it's gonna be loud, it's not gonna do anything for me, it's gonna have a big fence around it, people are gonna spray paint the fence and it's gonna look terrible. So we started at the beginning. What does this land mean? And this land was about exchange. So taking that idea, creating 3 scenarios. So these look like buildings. So you see these things over here, there. That's a building, right? But thinking about what the scenarios were of a resource, of whether it was economic, energy, information, community to bring people together, or a natural system. Those were the different types of exchange that then created the conversations. Starting with the idea of a resource, we thought of a luminous breathing organism. So think about a wastewater treatment plant as a luminous breathing organism. An idea about a facility that is visible and vocal and attractive. The proposal was a soccer pitch on the roof and a place that created exchange for information, or a perpetual motion machine that created more energy than the community needed. And a wastewater facility can do that. There's heat, there's moving water, there's methane. There are a lot of things that you can do to create a machine to produce energy. It takes money and it takes belief. An example is the Amager, what they call the ski slope. This is a waste-to-energy plant in Copenhagen. It's built, and it's a ski slope. So in the winter, it has snow on it, and all year it produces energy from waste. So when you think about that perpetual motion machine and that loop, taking trash, turning it into energy, and then also creating this icon in the landscape and a ski area that the community can use. So the second scenario was community, creating a place that built partnerships. So thinking of the idea of an ant colony, bringing everyone to the center, everyone back to help the system, and create an idea of industrial workforce or an industrial incubator that within this space could create places for creating bicycles, engineering, physical production on the site with the wastewater treatment plant. Or the idea of a flea market, creating a place for exchange. It could be farmers market, it could be retail sales, it could be community sales, and building that conversation with the community to create a message of sustainability. An example is Granville Island, taking an industrial site, and over time it grew to be this network and this web for art, education, and community gathering in North Vancouver. Then looking at the idea of a natural system. Where we started was with exchange, the idea that this was once an intertidal wetland. So that idea of nutrient exchange, this was a place for people, for creatures. This is where things changed. It was the liminal edge between sea and land. To create that idea of a natural system, the intertidal wetland became this constant exchange of nutrients. So thinking about what can you do with the waste when it's at its end of life? End of cycle, I should say. So it's compost, it's something that can be compressed, it's something that can create nutrients in the landscape, it's something that can have heat extracted from it, so you then create all these cycles that come from it that then turn back to nature. And then the idea of an urban garden. Could we take the roof and turn it into a greenhouse? Could we use the heat that the wastewater produces to create this place for growth? So looking at an example, this is the Olympic Sculpture Park. This was a series of 6 railroads that separated the city from the water on the north end of Seattle. And this project creates a bridge across the water with a native landscape that works its way down to the sea. Everett Crowley Park was a brownfield. This is what a brownfield can look like when you take that idea of natural systems that can biophytoremediate and take a brownfield system and turn it into what is a wildlife habitat. So coming back to this idea of a new potential and where we can be, one of the most powerful effects of regenerative development is the experience of seeing the world anew. So seeing the new possibilities, the potential, and the possibilities that we can do together. So communicating with collaborators around these insights is the thing that can create transformative engagement and create that change that we need. Our opportunities now, and we are the new potential.
So hopefully you're all feeling very inspired about the concept of buildings and what you can do with them, because that's what I'm going to talk about with my little keynote my little address that I'm going to keep nice and short here. So it's been my first 6 months on the job. I've really focused on getting to know the community, what we do for the community. All of you, if I haven't met you yet, please reach out to me. I would love to meet you. And the impacts and impressions that I've gotten in those first 6 months are that we are an important resource, and we really need to do this next phase of our plan for Flagship with all of you as partners. So we want you to be involved in this. Where are we at with Flagship? Well, we are a group of scientists, so we are doing our research. Our next step in the Flagship process is that we're going to be doing strategic planning with the board and leadership in December, and that's going to help us to really come up with that identity and vision piece that we're going to move forward with to then reach out to all of you and start planning sessions, listening sessions, task forces, groups, ways that you can get involved, surveys, get all that feedback so that we can then start to look at what our capital campaign will look like, what our blueprints will look like as we build the actual physical structure in our minds, what we're going to be offering to the community. So it is an exciting time. It's going to take us some time. For the timeline itself, we are looking at probably 3 to 5 years is what we're saying. We don't know exactly how long, because as I'm sure all of you who have been involved in construction processes or building homes or renovating homes or any of that know, it is very susceptible to the permitting process, to the whims of construction, availability of materials, et cetera. So we're going to get through this as quickly as we can, but in a way that we can do it really mindfully and make sure we're making the best decisions for the organization and the community. And one last thing I wanted to touch on with the Flagship Building, because I know that there's a lot of sentiment to our Fort Worden space, and we are still going to be present at Fort Worden. The museum building where Hope is, our orca skeleton, we're going to be retaining that building. It's going to be an environmental learning center where we'll be teaching our camps and our education programs out of, but our full visitor experience, our museum and aquarium exhibits are going to be in the Flagship Building. The pier will be coming down. That is the state park's decision. So, that will be happening. What they plan to do and when that will happen, I don't have more information on that. But I do know that we're incredibly excited to be downtown, moving downtown, being a part of that experience. It opens us up to a whole new audience of folks who will be coming in as visitors that we can share our mission with and really use the building to explain why this community is important and why we're fighting rising sea levels together, and what we do does make a difference and does matter. So we are so excited to have that space, and we thank all of you who've been involved in that decision and funding and volunteering down there and really making it start to feel like our own space. So thank you. Our next speaker is our testimonial speaker, Stefanie Worwag, who is one of our most dedicated volunteers. And I also want to call out her husband, Mario, who is not going to be speaking, but was really instrumental in this project she's going to be talking about as well. So this is such an inspiring story to me personally, coming here and getting to be involved in this. We knew that this was such an awe-inspiring experience, and it is going to be that for everyone who visits Union Wharf once. once Gunther, our gray whale skeleton, is out there. So Stefanie, who is a veterinarian by training, is going to weave this story for us. So please welcome Stefanie Worwag.
So yes, I'm a veterinarian, and I never thought I would be standing here one day as a volunteer of the Marine Science Center talking about a gray whale. I'm not one of those people that knew since their childhood what you're going to be in your life, but my passion for animals always has been there. I remember the time I was probably in 5th or 6th grade, and we were reading a story about this family in a car with their dog, and they died in a wildfire. And the class was all quiet, and I said loud, "The poor dog." So, but I do like people too. And you know that we veterinarians, we don't only treat the animals, we also treat the clients, the owners. But marine mammals, I only treated dogs and cats, and anything else was exotics to me. So my husband Mario and I moved here in 2016, and we started volunteering in 2017 for the Marine Science Center. And I didn't grow up anywhere near water, so learning about marine mammals was really fascinating, and we both became volunteers for the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. And I felt maybe my love for animals growing even bigger, maybe as big as a gray whale. So this is how the story with Gunther started. We responded to a call for a stranded dead gray whale at Olele Point. And the gray whale had been floating in the shipping lanes for a couple days and then washed ashore just a few miles from where we live. The people living right there where he's stranded really were hoping that we could move the whale somewhere else. But you know, it's not easy to find a solution for such a big animal. You can't just bury it like a seal. You can sink it, but it requires a permit and is overall really, really expensive. And you shouldn't try to use explosives like Oregon did, right, a way back. I don't know if you've seen the video. Pieces of whale carcass flowing all over the place, hitting cars, and the majority of the carcass was still there. So then my husband had the glorious idea to move the carcass to our beach. We are really lucky to have some beachfront property that's fairly isolated. So that's how we ended up with a gray whale on our property. Cascadia Research towed it to our beach. And in conjunction with SR3, we performed a necropsy, which is an autopsy for people. And the main finding was that the whale was malnourished, undernourished. The blubber level was really thin. There was no food in the stomach or in intestines. The stomach contained some eelgrass that can be a sign of desperation feeding. So a little bit about gray whales. Once common throughout the northern hemisphere, now they are only pretty much found in the North Pacific Ocean. Commercial whaling almost caused them to go extinct, but international conservation measurements in the 1930s and 40s were started. They were protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act in 1972. And in 1994, the eastern population was delisted of the endangered species list. So that shows you how collective action can work. Gray whales grow up to 40 to 50 feet. They can weigh up to 90,000 pounds. They don't have a dorsal fin, but they have a hump, and they have 6 to 12 little bumps called knuckles. They are baleen whales consuming invertebrates by filtering through their baleen plates. And gray whales make one of the largest annual migrations of any mammals. They travel 10 to 14,000 miles round trip. They go up north, feeding in the Arctic during the summer, and then head south to Baja, Mexico, for breeding and birthing. So their major threats include vessel strikes. They do like to swim in the shipping lanes. Entanglement in fishing gear. Activity through whale watching. Disturbances through whale watching activities. Ocean noise generally, and habitat destruction. The impact of climate change is unknown, but it is considered one of the largest threats, particularly how altered oceanic conditions are resulting in the change of prey distribution. So Gunther was part of an unusual mortality event that started in 2019 when a large number of gray whales stranded along the entire Pacific coast. And here's some data from NOAA. This is as of June of this year. So you see that in the US, we had 122 whale strandings. It did drop to 79 in 2020, and we had 54 last year. The final number of this year is not out yet. And along the entire Pacific coast, so including Mexico and Canada, we had 216 strandings, 172 in 2019, 172 in 2020, and 114 last year. And the actually whales that end up stranded, dead strandings, is a really, really small percentage of the entire number of gray whales that die each year. So the causes of the unusual mortality event are unknown. Many of the whales that washed up and were examined had evidence of emaciation, but that was not consistent across all the whales examined. So more research is needed. NOAA is currently reviewing the data, looking at the possible links between the unusual mortality event and how climate change is affecting the ocean ecosystem. So we'll have to wait for that to come out. So Mario and I quickly realized that it might be a really fascinating opportunity to get a permit for the bones and to consider to assemble the bones somehow. The initial thought was to keep it in our yard with the help of the Marine Science Center. So after the necropsy, Gunther was left on our beach to decompose. We applied lime regularly to decrease the smell and possibly to speed up the decaying process. So interestingly, we did not see any birds eating off the carcass, and we think the lime kept them away. We saw some coyote marks, and we also think that the crabs had a feast when Gunther was floating in the high tide. So the necropsy was done beginning June, and by October, we had all the bones in our yard. So we were really thankful that the community boat project in Port Hadlock helped us with getting the skull into our yard. They actually fabricated a little carrying case, and then we put it onto a little raft and was then bringing it over to our county park, and then we put it on a pickup truck and brought it back into our yard right there, and that's the group. So the first winter, the bones just hung out in our garage, and then COVID hit. We then formed our own bubble, and we asked two of our friends, Les Schnick, who is an industrial designer, artist, and has worked with boats many, many years, and Rick Brendan, who is a welder and a previous owner of the Marine Co-op, if they would be interested in helping with our project. And they readily agreed, even though I'm not quite sure if they realized how much time and work it really would mean. So we cleaned the bones, we painted them because it would be outside, and then we started with the skull in 2020 to 21, and then we got to the rib cage. We started last year and pretty much finished up this year. And Les and Rick, they're like perfectionists. They have done such an amazing job. So over time, knowing what an amazing skeleton this would be, we felt that this should be really shared with the entire community. and that the Marine Science Center would be the perfect new caretaker of Gunther. The new location, the Flagship Building, right, is looking right out onto Union Wharf, the new resting place for Gunther. So we hope that this magnificent creature will greet visitors coming into the Flagship Building, coming in on the Whidbey Island ferry, coming in on the cruise ship, or anybody walking around downtown. And we hope that Gunther will help raise awareness about the health of the Salish Sea and motivate people to action. So would I have thought I would ever assemble a gray whale skeleton or articulate a gray whale skeleton? No. I became a veterinarian because of my love of dogs and cats, but truly all animals. And the Marine Science Center gave me the opportunity and motivation to expand my love and concern for marine mammals. Port Townsend is really lucky to have such an important institution here that has so much to offer. It has never been more important to teach and inspire conservation. And it's so important that the Marine Science Center can continue its work. So since it's relying mostly on donations, it would be wonderful if everybody could make a donation they're comfortable with. Thank you so much for coming this morning and supporting this great institution.
Thank you so much, Stefanie and Mario. And there's one more thing I just wanted to say before we wrap up today. We do have a very special donation in memory of Ken Kiesel, who was a wonderful volunteer for us from 2011 to 2018. He gave over 600 hours of his time as a docent and with the Marine Mammal Stranding Network. So we received a donation and a match for all of you and your donations up to $10,000 today. And we just wanted to really express our gratitude to his wife, Chris, who is with us, and would love to have that donation matched. So thank you so much, Chris. And thank you all for attending today. It's been so wonderful to see you.